Welcome to Inside the Thunder. I'm KD Hudnall, and on this show, I go one-on-one with some of the most recognizable names in Marshall athletics history. All Mid-American Conference freshman team selection in 1999, first team All Mid-American Conference, and academic All-American in 2002. Marshall men's basketball's number 8 all-time leading scorer with 1,803 points and the number 2 all-time leading rebounder with 1,086. On top of all that, Marshall Athletics Hall of Fame class of 2008. Today, we're going inside the Thunder with JR Vanhoose. On the short list of Marshall basketball players that have achieved levels of greatness that is, I consider, rarefied air. My guess now, JR Vanhoose is certainly one of those guys. We're going to talk a lot of Herd basketball. We're going to get to know JR a little bit more. We're going to try to pry some stories out of him if we can, get some laughs and share some good times. But one thing I've learned just in the brief time while we've been talking, even before we hit the record button, is that he's far more than a basketball player. And there was a huge accolade that came his way from a professional standpoint that we're going to get into in a little bit, which is just so dang on wicked cool. But first off, I got to say, JR, thank you for agreeing to come on Inside the Thunder and just spend a little bit of time with me.
Oh man, listen, I'm happy to be here and excited to do this.
Good. Well, then let's get it going, because I can't wait to hear or see where this one's going to go. I've been looking forward to this one all week long since you said, "Yeah, man, let's do it." I guess the best thing to start is how you even get to Marshall, right? Because Parade High School All-American, 2-time Kentucky Basketball Player of the Year, and you end up in Huntington, West Virginia, which at the time, you know, Herd fans, I think, are kind of spoiled on basketball success here in recent years. That wasn't really the case, at least at the beginning of my undergraduate tenure. So how does someone of your caliber coming out of high school even end up in Huntington?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, and nobody's really phrased it kind of like that. And I'm sure people know, but and again, I don't mind to talk about myself, I guess, a little bit. But
good,
pretty, like you said, pretty storied high school basketball career. I mean, I think and I'm pretty sure this is accurate, I'm still the only person in Kentucky high school basketball history to score over 3,000 points, have more than 2,000 rebounds, and block more than 500 shots. And that's when I say it like that, and even when people still ask me about that, that's kind of unbelievable, because I started playing basketball when I was 8 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Buddy basketball. I'm sure you had it in your town.
Of course,
we had it here, and I wasn't very good. I was bigger than everybody else, but the first coach I ever had, a gentleman named Gary Sellers, who's passed away since, but I couldn't shoot, and so I could rebound, and so he told me to just keep your hands up. And well, I took that literally. I would run up and down the floor with my hands in there, right? And so people would always say, well, you always keep your hands up. Well, it's because of him. I took it literally. But through a lot of hard work and a lot of very good coaches, of course, my parents were always supportive, and, in a small town, people that pay attention to you, you want to do the right things for them. Mm-hmm. And so just learned how to play the game. It's kind of interesting. My parents are not from, well, I shouldn't say they're not from. My dad was born in Paintsville, but in the 1950s, when he was about 2 or 3, like most people in Appalachia, my grandparents moved north. It was called the Hillbilly Highway. People, as the coal markets kind of stopped in this part of the world, people had to find jobs, and so people moved to Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, places like that, and my grandparents moved to Indiana, and so my dad grew up there. My dad played high school basketball there. My dad played college basketball in Indiana, and my mom is from there. And so my dad came back, married my mom. They both came back, and I grew up here. And so growing up, I always heard my dad's stories of high school basketball, and and it wasn't Kentucky basketball, it was Indiana high school basketball, which we all know is Hoosier hysteria. It's
Hmm.
crazy. And my dad played with a guy in high school named Monty Tao, who little short point guard, went to NC State and played with Michael Thompson. They won a national championship. And my dad's high school coach was a young coach when my dad was playing, and he actually just recently retired in Indiana. His name was Jack Kiefer. He retired from Lawrence North High School, and I mean he coached Greg Oden and Mike Conley and Eric Montross and all these guys. And so I grew up listening to those stories, Indiana high school basketball. I mean, my dad played against Kyle Macy in high school, and so when Hoosiers came out, of course, I was a young kid. We're the same age, so you can remember when Hoosiers came out. And of course, my dad would be like, that's exactly what it was like. The town shut down and people followed the bus. And I wanted to experience stuff like that. And so, a lot of hard work, a lot of good coaching. And fortunately for my career, I did get to experience that. In Kentucky, just like Indiana, there's one state champion. Well, not in Indiana anymore, but it used to be. There were no classes. One state champion in basketball, and I was fortunate. In my small high school, we played in 4 straight state tournaments and won a state championship. And my senior year, we got beat in the state finals. And so I got to experience. Really, I mean, it was kind of like the real life version of the movie Hoosiers. I
Hmm.
mean, we won championships and had those parades and had those big pep rallies and had vehicles following the buses to games. And so it was really a surreal experience. But to get back to your question, fortunately, before I got into high school at Paintsville, we had a great group of guys led by John Pelfrey, who was Mr. Basketball from the same high school that I attended 10 years before I was. And it just so happened he played at Kentucky while Billy Donovan was an assistant coach. And when Billy Donovan got the head coaching job at Marshall, John became one of his assistant coaches. And that was really one of the first times I was introduced to Marshall basketball.
Hmm.
I was a freshman and I got a letter in the mail. It was a questionnaire from John, and I started to learn a little bit about Marshall basketball.
But even at that point, there's got to be suitors aplenty vying for
Oh,
the talents of JR Vanhoose.
yeah. I mean,
Now, how do you fight through the well, let me put it this way. How does Marshall fight through the undoubtedly the University of Kentucky's? Got to be the Indianas of the world coming after you to, to ultimately get you to sign your name to play basketball for the Herd. How does that happen?
well, it was hectic. The whole recruiting process and listen, again, not to brag on myself, but I had become a player that by the end of my freshman year in high school, like I didn't understand. I just wanted to play and win. I wanted to
Right.
play and win a state championship and help my team and things like that. But along that path, you prove that you can be a successful individual basketball player. And I didn't really realize, like the magnitude of it all. But I can remember at the end of my freshman year, I think it was in April or something. USA Today used to list like the top players in each state and the player of the year and all this. And I can remember looking and there was a list of like the top players in each class. Well, there was only 5 freshmen and I was like one of the 5. And I was like, is this like in the country? Like, are they talking like, and it was, and I couldn't believe it. To be ranked like by recruiting analysts and media, like one of the top 5 players in the country for your class. I mean, it's kind of surreal,
Yeah.
and so that adds a lot of pressure to things that you already want to do because people expect you to be a certain type of player, right? I mean, they expect you to score 25, 30 points or get 20 rebounds or, do all these crazy things. And so it was a lot of not getting to experience like your teenage years, right? Because you're
Hmm.
always working because you didn't want to disappoint anyone who, may have never watched you play until you show up at their gym.
Right.
And so, getting to experience that was kind of surreal. And then when you get to meet these college coaches who want to try and recruit you to their school, I mean, getting to meet, like you said, Bobby Knight, Rick Pitino, and Roy Williams, and who was at Kansas at the time, and all these different legendary coaches, and they're talking to you about, what they can do for you if you come to their school, and what it would mean to their program if you came there. And I mean, it was really, I say surreal, but it was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, we were talking before about you being small town West Virginia. I mean, small town Kentucky, that doesn't happen very often, and when it does, people put a lot of expectations on you that you have to be a certain type of player to live up to what people think that is going to happen for you. And so, taking all these unofficial visits as an underclassman, of course, like I said, my parents were from Indiana. So, a couple unofficial visits to see Bobby Knight, Dan Dakich at Indiana, Kevin O'Neill, who was the head coach at Tennessee, of course, Rick Pitino at Kentucky. And yeah, I mean, by the time, your senior season rolls around and you've stayed, one of the top 5, 10, 15 players in the rankings all through your high school career. And I mean, people probably don't realize well, not today, but the amount of mail that would come in to like school or your house addressed to you. I mean, in my house now, my parents kept everything. So we have like 8 or 9 big just Tupperware boxes of just old letters, just recruiting letters, from, I mean, you name the school. I went through them a couple years ago. They're in there, so, and yeah, so, I mean, when you, when people think about Marshall in comparison to those schools, a lot of people are surprised, but, and I tell people all the time, growing up an hour away from Huntington, it's not like Marshall was an unknown, right? I mean, we would shop for Christmas gifts or things like that at the Huntington Mall. I mean, Lexington was an hour and 45 minutes, 2 hours away. So, you can make a short trip to Huntington and kind of accomplish those things. So it's not like, I'd never been to Huntington, but, having that pressure of being recruited by those top schools, nobody is thinking about Marshall, right? Most of all me, especially, but I just liked the way that the conversations went with Coach Greg Marshall, who was an assistant at the time, Steve Snell, Brian Poor. These guys who were involved in that recruiting process did a really good job and kept my interest in for that school. So before my senior year began, that's when you could have those in-home visits. Coaches would come into your home and make like their best presentation about why their school was the best for you. So, and it was a 2-week period, 14 days coaches could come in, and it was unbelievable. I had 16 schools come in 14 days. So, I mean, there were a few days where you had 2 visits, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
not only were you doing like school and, preseason conditioning basketball pickup games, you were having to go home in the evening and set aside sometimes 2 or 3 hours for a single coach, or in a case where you had multiple coaches come in a day, 4, maybe 5 hours, so it was an all day thing. But, I didn't want to exclude people that I enjoyed. And so Marshall had made that in-home visit list. Morehead State did, because, Kyle Macy was the head coach there at the time. Of course, him and my dad had that history. And so, it's like an hour away from Painesville. So, I mean, I had all these schools, Indiana, Notre Dame, John McLeod was the head coach. I mean, oh my gosh, they were the first school to offer me a scholarship, when I was a junior. So, I'm trying to think of all the schools for those in-home visits. It was West Virginia, Gal Catholic came in, Mississippi State, Indiana, Virginia Tech, Eastern Kentucky, Kentucky had talked about it, but we hadn't been able to work out a date. But I'd taken unofficial visits there, and so they were in that recruiting process. And so it was schools like that, and of course you have Marshall, Moorhead, and all those things, and those 2 weeks were a absolute whirlwind. I mean, by the end of the 14 days, it felt like all the visits had blended into a blur. Everybody basically had said the same thing 16, 17 times, right? So I'd heard the same thing, but Marshall stood out. And so, after that in-home visit process, I narrowed my list down to 5, and Marshall was in the top 5. And it was just because of Greg White, Greg Marshall. They came in, did the in-home visit, and I really enjoyed the things that they were saying, the things that they were talking about, and actually decided to take a visit to Marshall. And so that's really kind of how all of that got started. I mean, they were really on the outside looking in, but once I got to know the coaching staff, and then eventually when I made the visit and met the players and the support staff, I mean, it was really just an easy decision. And then factor in, you're close to home. And of course, in Paintsville, we get WSAZ. So when the games were on TV, people in my hometown could watch. My parents could make the trip during the week to watch home games. And so, I mean, it really became just a no-brainer. I mean, really, it did. And, they were looking for some freshmen to come in and play immediately. Tamar Slay and I were getting recruited at the same time. And so we kind of talked and met each other and had an instant friendship. And he was like, "What are you thinking?" And I told him what I was thinking. And, he was kind of thinking the same thing. And I think we ended up committing on the same day. It was kind of more like, all right, well, if you say you're going to, then I'm going to come too. We can do this together, and yeah, it just worked out that way. I mean, it was, you kind of try to factor in everything that you want.
Sure.
I wanted to play as a freshman. I maybe start. I didn't know if that was going to be a possibility. But Marshall had all of these things that I was looking for. A really good supportive coaching staff, supporting staff, great players, not just players, but just great guys. I can remember the schools I took official visits to were Notre Dame, Vanderbilt, and Marshall. That was like the final 3. I love Notre Dame. It was about an hour, 15 minutes from where my grandparents live in Indiana. Big school, which wouldn't have been a problem. But, I knew John McLeod was under some pressure. If he didn't start to turn things around, it wasn't looking very good for him. And I believe he either got fired my freshman year or what was going to be my sophomore year in college. And so that was probably a good decision to not, have to go through a coaching change. But, they got a guy named Troy Murphy instead of me. Troy played in the NBA for a long time. So I'm pretty sure it worked out for Notre Dame. Vanderbilt, I don't know. Coach Van Bredikoff, it just never felt like a good fit. Just didn't feel comfortable. It felt a little stuffy. I know that's probably not a good word, but it just didn't feel right. And then Marshall was the last one, the last visit. And, when I walked into the practice, Coach White stopped practice, made everybody come over, shake my hand, introduce themselves. And I knew a couple of the guys already. I'd played against Joe DeBurgess in high school. I played against Vondell Morton in high school. And so I knew some of the guys on the team. But, that kind of put me at ease. They came over, introduced themselves, and you didn't get this sense of, well, I'm better than you because I'm in college and you're a high school recruit. If that makes any sense.
Sure.
And so it was, everything just felt comfortable. I mean, Huntington was a town I was comfortable with. I'd been there many times. And they were looking for some players to come in and really essentially help turn the program around. Billy and John Pelfrey had done a good job, but they were on the air for a couple years before they went off to Florida. You
Mhm.
know, before them, Dwight Freeman, those years, those were kind of rough years. And so Greg White, an alumni, you know, the year that I was getting recruited was the first year that they were in the MAC. You know, they had just come off or come out of the Southern Conference, where I think they'd won the North Division, and so there was a little bit of momentum going forward. You know, the MAC was a tough conference, which Marshall had been in before, and some good players. I mean, I think at that time, Bonzi Wells was playing at Ball State. Zerbiak was at Miami of Ohio. You know, and Earl Boykins had, I think he'd just left Eastern Michigan. And so you have these guys who were making NBA careers coming out of this conference. And so, yeah, I felt it was a good opportunity to come in and really try to, you know, make Marshall a basketball school, essentially. Yeah, you know, because they had been, and then, you know, a couple down years. Football was kind of doing its own thing, you know, a couple
Mhm.
national championships, and you know they were starting to do that, and so you felt like you were going to be able to do something with the program and move it forward in a good direction.
Well, I still think back to that time, and you know that was my freshman year at Marshall too. It was our first year in the MAC, 1997, and I remember the buzz was just football, football, football. You know, that's what it was, and that's what makes me ask the question: how does Marshall even compete for a top 5 player? You know, or a top 10 player, whatever the ranking was, a top player in the country, because that just seems so um so out of left field for that. But it seems like all these boxes just started to check for you.
Yeah,
And
yeah. I guess that's a good way to put it. Boxes were, and I guess you know, I guess when I tell people, I probably didn't even realize what the boxes were
yeah,
until you started to really like see them in your face. Like, okay, this is close to home,
right,
right? Opportunity to play a lot as a freshman, maybe
right.
start. I mean, who knows? You know, who knows what's going to happen? Um, a conference where guys 1, 2 going to the league every year.
Mhm.
You know, tough competition. Yeah, I mean, it started to turn into a really good situation where I didn't feel like somebody was going to, you know, make me sit behind somebody that I was going to have to learn from for a year or two before I actually started seeing a lot of court time. You
Mhm.
know, as happens in a lot of cases, you know, you regardless of what your ranking is in high school, sometimes you just pick the wrong school because the situation's not right, but the prestige of that program is so high that you feel like you can't say no,
Mhm.
you know, and so I felt in my head just looking at what the football program had done. I mean, Randy Moss was there. You
Mhm.
knew he was going to the NFL, right? Chad Pennington was there. And then, like I said, these guys who were playing basketball in that conference. So it's not like you couldn't make that next step from Marshall. I mean, people had done it,
Yep.
and basketball players had done it before from Marshall. And so, really, I mean, it was at the end of the day, it was really an easy decision. It really
That
was.
So after you make that decision, there's a moment. There has to be a moment that, whether it occurred at some point during your freshman year or whenever it occurred, it had to have occurred to where you went to where something just clicked and went, "I knew I made the right choice." What was that moment for you?
Well, you know, I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like I am a big, and I still am. I'm a big homebody. Like
Mhm.
I like being close to my hometown, close to my family, uh, and so I can remember just being so nervous before I moved to Huntington and thinking in my head, "Why are you so nervous?" You know, but as most people will understand, when you move away to college, regardless of where you go, that is a huge decision because it's almost like you know that you're moving from a teenager to the beginning of your adulthood,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, it's a scary time. You know, it's a scary time because of the unknowns, right? You're leaving mom and dad, brother, sister, whatever, friends, family, girlfriend, whatever, and you're taking that step where it's kind of like, all right, this is on you now.
Yep.
We we have done what we can. Hopefully you have the life skills to succeed,
Yep.
and so you throw that pressure into, hey, I'm actually a college athlete and I have to take care of business too, on the court, in the classroom, and then juggle all of this other stuff together. I mean, it's a big decision. And so I can remember, cheering up on the way to Huntington that first day, just thinking like, man, like like this is happening. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is it. This is your growing up moment, I guess.
Yeah.
You
You're
well,
leaving
I
the
mean,
nest, brother. You are leaving
yeah,
the nest.
you're leaving the nest, but when you're in high school, you feel like you're grown up already.
Yeah.
But then when that moment hits you in the face, you're kind of like, all right, this is really scary.
Yeah.
I hope
Yeah.
I can do this. But I think it was right after that. You get settled in your dorm. Tamar Slay's there. We had talked, since we committed and signed and all those things, and the guys just start calling you. Like, hey, we're going. We're playing pickup tonight. And so it's kind of like, all right, I'm part of this team now.
Yep. Yep.
And there was no like, there was no like freshman hazing or anything like that. You just all of a sudden I felt accepted from the beginning. The guys knew that Tamar and I and the newer people who had come in. Cornelius Jackson had transferred the year before, and so he was just then becoming eligible. And so those guys knew that we were there to help them win. We weren't there to, it's not like I was like, I'm going to take your job, get out of my way. No, it wasn't that. The older guys that were the post players, they were kind of showing you the ropes. Every once in a while, you get an elbow or good, a good little shot to the body to let you know, like, hey, this, you're not going to take this yet. We're going to battle you for it.
Yeah.
But that's all competition. It wasn't anything ugly. They weren't trying to pick on you. It was just you were a part of the family, and you were going to have to prove to them that you could do everything that people had been telling them that you were going to do. And so, I think I felt it. I felt comfortable right from the beginning. It was just all those fears and everything that I had experienced on the move-in day. They went away pretty quickly. I didn't feel like an outsider. I was accepted immediately, and after first few weeks, you start to think, yeah, this is going to work. I think this is going to work out. I can do this, and this was definitely a good choice.
That's an interesting point that you make up. That of course regular students like me at that time that was not an athlete. A lot of times we don't think about that, but you also, you got to adjust to leaving home just like I had to, except you had the pressure of going out and performing on a much bigger stage. All I had to do was make it to class by 9 a.m. You had to go out and perform twice a week, sometimes 3 times a week.
College basketball and college athletics are different than high school, right? And when I was in high school, we didn't do a lot of weightlifting, a lot of weight training. And so that's a new experience for me. Like, what is the weight room? The strength coach starts talking about these exercises, and you're thinking in your head, like, I have no idea what the hell this guy's talking about. Right. Mm-hmm. And so that's a whole new experience. And then the pace and physicality of the college game is a new experience. And so it's like everything is new, but at the same time, it wasn't, because the guys that were part of the team just made you feel so comfortable, and they were so encouraging, and the coaches were so encouraging that you felt like, I have made a right decision because these people want me here. They want what's the best for me. And they're going to push me to get that, but I want them to do that. Sure. I don't expect things are going to be handed to me. I'm going to have to work for it. And I was prepared to do that. It was just, I'm glad those guys and coaches accepted me like that, so that it didn't feel like I was going through those struggles by myself, because everybody goes through that. People just don't talk about that, and so when you can have a teammate say, hey, look, I was in your situation last year or 2 years ago, It's going to be fine. You can do this. This is what we do. I'll show you. I mean, that makes it instantly better,
Yeah.
and kind of makes it easier to perform on the court when you have that kind of support.
Yeah, it seems like in the moment, at least from what I remember, those days seemed like they lasted forever. But it also seemed like in the snap of a finger, I felt adjusted to college life. I felt like, man, this ain't no big deal. What the hell was I sweating? I can do this. So you make the transition and you're like, this ain't nothing, man. This is nothing. Were you also that guy that spends all this time dedicated to his academics? You spend all your time working on your craft to where you told me sometimes you don't have as much fun as you probably would have liked because you're so laser focused. So is your fun between the whistles on game day? Is that the release? Is that the relaxation period to an extent?
Well, listen, I always felt, for me anyway, the the reason I enjoyed history so much was because that was my escape from everything.
Okay.
You get if when and even today when I get into a book, I just kind of forget about everything else, and I guess that goes along with having that pressure in high school, to perform. For me, from the time I was in 8th grade on the varsity, 5 years of that, and then college is even a little bit more pressure. You got to perform, and people think you're this amazing, highly ranked recruit. You have to do these certain things. So, I would put everything I could into what went on the court, what went on in the weight room, did the things that I needed to do there. But yeah, getting back to my dorm room or later when I had an apartment at Marshall, just getting into a book and just kind of having that as a release, and then that pressure, just, all those things, that's what kind of made me relax. And so those were good. I mean, those were always good moments. And, I mean, it's good to have pressure to perform because, I think, if you're a player worth anything, you want to have pressure. You
Sure.
want to be able to, to perform in those big moments. But yeah, I mean, to get away from that, yeah, it was always, it wasn't basketball, like going into the gym or shooting or anything like that, because that's where you did your work,
Sure.
getting off and maybe going to the library, taking myself into the archives at the Drinko Library, that doing some research, doing some reading. Those were my escapes. And I think that's what helped keep me balanced too, because it's not all basketball. I mean, yeah, I mean, when you're a college athlete, you put in a lot of time, but I think people don't realize that you got some free time too, but
Mhm.
that's when you take care of your academics, and, you have to get rest, of course. I mean, I was never one that, I mean, I didn't mind to go out for a drink every once in a while. But I mean, I wasn't trying to go out and, party and club and things like that. Those were things that I felt took away from my free time.
There you go. That's a
I know people like to, when you're in college, that's when you go to keggers and, you go to those
everybody.
house parties and you do all those things. But for me, I'm a little bit socially awkward. I don't like big crowds. I know that's so weird to say. Somebody that plays in front of thousands of people doesn't like big
I was
crowds,
gonna
but
say.
I can deal with it on the court. But like, when there's a lot of people around you or there's loud music, I mean
Yeah.
that just kind of that gets my anxiety up, right? And so I like quiet spaces. It's kind of like a reflection kind of thing. It's just nice, quiet. Let's enjoy the quiet. And so, but yeah, those were my escapes. It wasn't, I wasn't out doing, parties and things like that, which, looking back as an adult now, you're like, you know what, you probably could have done that a few times and enjoyed it. People
Yeah.
probably would have not, they would have liked to have seen you at things like that. But yeah, I mean, that's, I
But
don't feel like I missed out on anything. I felt like I did that enough.
there you go. I was gonna
But
say, but they enjoy seeing you just as much today at a basketball game as they probably would have at a house party. That
that's probably true. And
you know.
I mean, it was just I just wasn't into that when I was young in high school, going to parties and hanging out, just, shooting the bull or whatever. I
Mhm.
just didn't do that. I went to school, I played basketball, and then when I came home in the evenings, like I just wanted to relax, just wanted to rest because, when you have to perform on the court, I mean that is mentally draining in itself. Much less, you get as a post player, you get physically beat up a lot, and so
Yeah.
you just want to sit down, relax, and do some, just not have to stand up and move around all the time. I know
Just
that
lay
sounds
down and
lazy.
chill.
That sounds totally lazy, but I mean
No, it
that's
does not. It does not. I get that. Every night I come home from work, and the biggest exhale of my day is when I first lay down in the bed and take all the pressure off my spine and my hips
yeah.
and my knees, and I'm like, ah. So I
Yeah,
get
see, I
that.
mean, that's me now. My wife, she just got the head coaching job at Alice Lloyd College, which is close. She's a volleyball coach, and she's always on the move. She does club volleyball, and she's always on the move, and she loves that. She loves social interaction and stuff like that. I would much rather enjoy sitting at my house with my three dogs and my cat, watching like crime shows on TV. Like that. I mean, that's a perfect night, perfect
Geez,
evening for
maybe
me.
you need to hang out with my wife, because I guarantee you right now, I'm in the office doing this with you. I bet you anything she's got some crime investigative show on
That's a,
downstairs
hey,
right
that's
now.
what time. Listen, I have certain TV shows, so we have the Hulu TV app,
There
the
you go.
free TV app. So they have Unsolved Mysteries 24/7. I watch that, right? 48 hours, Dateline TV, or just like these detective shows, First
Yeah.
48 or something. Like, I mean, that's what you can find me doing most evenings. That's what I'm watching.
I feel like I know you, because I live with that. I live with that every day of my life. Yeah, every day of my life. That is
Well,
what my
I
wife
mean,
is doing.
I've always been like that. That's just how I relax. I mean, I just that's my relaxation.
That's and you talked about like getting lost in a book, right? To me, that is always something that I've never been able to do. And I hear people talking about like, oh man, you get yourself into a good book and you'll lose hours. Like hours will go by and I will not realize it. And that was never one of my strong suits. I struggled with that mightily in school. It was just that was work to me. So
Yeah.
when someone says, "Oh, that's my escape," to me, that makes my brain work hard, so that's not relaxing to me, because I don't you're blessed to be able to retain that information and get it the first go around, and it's like,
Well, like we talked before, I've always been a history person. I've
yep,
enjoyed history, and I had people around me who kind of stoked that enjoyment, and so and it's kind of weird to say, when I read history books on whatever, a president or a war, it's almost like as I'm reading it in my mind, it's playing
I can
almost
understand
like a
that.
movie of what I think it's going to look like. And so that is, I know that's kind of weird to describe,
No,
but
not at all. I get that totally.
you can kind of picture what, and it's pretty neat as an author because you get people to picture things as you write them,
Hmm.
and so I just enjoy that. Like somebody's trying to tell me a story, but I get to picture it in my mind how I think it should look or what the author's trying to tell me, and so it and it was just a way to relax me. Like you said, it
Right.
made you feel like you were working
I
to try and
was.
understand, but in my head, it was like it was taking other things that may be on my mind about the scouting report we'd just gone over or the opponent for tomorrow or whatever, and letting my brain relax and recover from that information so then I could think about it later and then process it a little bit more, I guess.
See what I was doing while you were telling your story of being recruited and talking to Tamar, and you want to do this? I think I want to do this. That I was playing that movie out in my head. I was picturing 1998 Tamar Slay, 1998 JR Vanhoose giving looks at each other, going, "I don't know,
Yeah.
man. You down? I think I'm down. Let's do this. We might have a good time."
Well, and that's where that story you were asking me about, I can remember tomorrow was in Steve Snell's office,
Mhm.
and Coach White was meeting with me and my family, and Tamar and I had that discussion, and Greg Marshall was in there. You know, he was sitting crisscross applesauce on the floor, like, you know,
I forgot
everybody
that. Yeah, I remember that now.
everybody was in a chair except for Greg Marshall. He's in the floor. Coach White's behind his desk, and you know, we were getting ready to leave, and I'm sure the coaches probably found it hard to read me because I hadn't really let anybody in to know that I'd talked to Tamar or that we'd had this conversation. And so Greg White was just kind of like, well, you know, what did you think about your visit? You know, how did you feel that it went? And I said, well, Coach, I think I'm going to commit to you today. And as soon as I said that, Greg Marshall, I swear, he went from crisscross legs in the floor to, I mean, he probably he had to be 4 feet off the floor, like, jumping, right? And so, you know, Coach White was excited. Of course, Snell and Tamar come in, and then Tamar, you know, did his commitment. And, you know, there's a great picture of me and Greg Marshall and Coach White and Coach Snell with Tamar and I right after that. And you know,
Oh,
to
that
look back
day,
on it,
like right after that.
yeah,
That
yeah, you know, like we had, you know, everybody's smiling. You know, Tamar and I had just committed,
Oh, wow.
and you know, I think I thought a lot about that. You know, I got to go into the Hall of Fame in 2008, and then, you know, Tamar was playing overseas, so they didn't put him in until, you know, he had been able to show up for that. And, you know, Tamar and I, when I went to his induction, you know, we've got our rings on and are showing them, and I think back to that picture, and I was just like,
Yeah.
man, look at these two kids that really have no idea what's going on, and then, you know, here we are in the Hall of Fame. And, you know,
Yeah.
Tamar had a great, you know, couple years in the NBA and professionally overseas. And I mean, it's pretty amazing what a school like Marshall can do for, you know, Tamar's from Beckley,
Mhm.
and I'm from Eastern Kentucky, two kids from the coal fields of Appalachia. I mean, it's pretty neat to look back on that and just think of everything that happened, you know, from that one moment.
Yeah. I did not know that picture. I bet is pretty cool, man. Because
Well,
I didn't know if it
I'll
was.
send it to you when we get done here, and you can
Oh,
you
yeah.
can see how skinny Tamar and I were
Well,
both in high school.
weren't we all? But no, right after the commitment, they're like, okay, everybody, group photo, because
Yeah,
this
it
is
was
the
kind
one
of
we've
like
been waiting on.
hey, we have to we've got to celebrate this moment, you know.
So let's talk about like the playing career. Okay, so most of the folks that I talk to, you know, and I mentioned, like, as we get further and further away from our collegiate days, the best of our memories just kind of get whittled down, and the games run together. But there's always those few memories, those few instances that stand out above everything else. So, what are those moments in game, practice, whatever? What when you think of your time as a player at Marshall? What is that primary moment that your mind always goes back to? It goes, man, what a great time.
Well, you know, of course, I remember certain games,
Mhm.
certain moments in the games, but you know, I think, and as I get older, most of my fondest memories are just like being in the locker room or being in the weight room.
Mhm.
You know, like people playing jokes on somebody, or just, you know, just being with everybody,
Yeah.
uh, just being with the guys. I guess,
Yeah.
you know, Marshall has a alumni basketball weekend every year, and I don't get to see everybody that I played with, but when I get to see people who I played with, it's always a special feeling. And you know, I'm sure other colleges and other players have those experiences, but it's like when I see somebody like Joda, or
Mhm.
now that Cornelius is an assistant at Marshall, I see him, you know, when I go up there. And when I do get to see Tamar, Josh Perkey, you know, Sean Wooler, guys like that, it's always a very strong hug. And and we always tell each other we love the other person. And you know, I don't know because I'm not in those other schools. I'm not at those things, but I feel like we all have this great connection, and there's never like an ill word said to somebody else or an ill feeling. It's always a nice big warm hug. It's always like I said, even with Coach White,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's been 21 years since I've played for the man, and I'll still get texts from him. He'll still tell me that he loves me.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with Coach Snell. Coach Snell's at NC State now. Brian Poor is at West Virginia State. It's always a Facebook message or a quick text. Hey, I'm thinking about you, and that's something special. I think when you look back in your 20 years out of your college career, and you still have your head coach texting you or assistant coaches texting you, that's, I think, when you can really look back and be like, you know what, that was the best damn choice I ever made in my life. And you have those relationships. I mean, Sean Wooler has, he came in when I married my wife. He lived in Nebraska. He came in for the wedding. I mean, it's like, we would almost drop whatever we're doing if one of our former teammates needed something.
Mm-hmm.
If they needed help, or if they say, "Hey, can you do this for me?" Yeah, of course I can. What do you need? Where are you at? And to have that connection. I mean, you asked that question earlier. Yeah, that's when you realize, yeah, that was the best decision I've ever made in my life.
Yeah, that's what I've come to find out is the moments off the field, off the court, where you're putting in the work that nobody's seeing is
Yeah.
what
Well,
is
I
what
think
resonates.
that's what bonds you. I think that's what bonds you, because everybody, thousands of people get to see the games, right?
Yeah,
But they
yeah,
don't get to see you in August at 6 o'clock in the morning on the track by the basketball offices, right? And
right.
I mean, you can probably imagine how all of us thought. We're like, "Gosh, damn, man, this is too early to be out here running, right? I'm going to throw up. I don't feel like doing this, you know, lifting weights in the afternoon, playing pickup games until 9, 10 o'clock at night. But when you're doing those things, you're not, I guess your time for granted,
Yeah, yeah,
because everybody's just like you. Nobody wants to be there running at 6 o'clock in the morning. Nobody wants to get up early. But those are the times that you usually talk about the most when you see
yeah,
everybody else. Be like,
yeah.
hey, do you remember that time so and so like threw up on their shoes while we were, I mean, it's not like, do you remember this exact play that happened in this
Right.
game? It's never that. It's always, do you remember when somebody overslept and we had to run for that? Yeah, and you're like, oh yeah, we were pissed. We were gonna, like whatever. But those are the moments,
Yeah,
right?
that's the
It's
good
not,
stuff.
yeah, I mean, it's not but of course you have those special game moments, right? I mean,
Sure.
playing against West Virginia every year, getting to beat them my senior year, um, playing against great players, getting to play against Kentucky when I was a senior, at Rupp Arena was a special moment, of course. But yeah, I mean, when you ask that question, it's my mind did not go to games. It went
Right.
to just being in the locker room, for whatever, getting ready for practice or getting ready for a game or having a conversation with somebody about anything.
Right.
It's those moments, because when you're a college athlete, it feels like you're in those moments more than anything else, because you only play 30 games or so a season, right? It's the other 330 days when when you're doing something else with guys that kind of stand out in your mind.
Yeah, and I've run into that a lot. That's what the most of the folks are saying. It's those times away from the court, away from the field. And it's the trade-off, right? Because as a fan, you give me the memories on the court. But you as a teammate, you're giving each other those memories and those experiences almost anywhere but on the court.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
everything else.
I think back to, we had some some guys, and again, it's weird for me to talk about, a kid from Eastern Kentucky when we had a guy that came in with Tamar and myself named Edwin Johnson, who was from St. Petersburg, Florida. You know, Ed Ed and I were from completely different backgrounds. He's African American, I'm white. He's from Florida, I'm from Eastern Kentucky. But I'm bringing Ed home with me for Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
He's getting to meet my family, right? And I did the same thing for another player that we had, Serge Babo, who was from Africa. He had played high school basketball in Indiana and had come to Marshall. I think he ended up playing a year or two after I left, but I brought him home. And so it's different cultures, it's different backgrounds, and you're meshing all those things together, and you remember those moments, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
how special that was for my family to meet a couple of my teammates,
Mm-hmm.
and when I go back on alumni night, for my wife to meet those same people, or my nephew who's now 10, he wasn't even around when I played, but he's getting to meet the guys that I played with. And so
Mm-hmm.
you making those connections to different people, and that's what I enjoyed.
Yeah.
That's getting people from different backgrounds to get along is tough enough. And then you throw in the added thing of you guys are going to compete for minutes on the basketball
Yeah.
floor,
Yeah.
and it could go either way. You could have people who absolutely hate each other or people who love each other. And fortunately, I was in a great situation where we didn't have a lot of problems like that. Everybody got along, understood their role, and we kind of meshed together and became a family. And like I said, 20 years later, you can still see that when we all are around each other,
Mm-hmm.
when we have these alumni gatherings.
Yeah. There are always guys on every team that come to work every day and bust their ass and do everything the right way. And for whatever reason, um, they'll never be recognized to the fullest extent that they should for the work that they did. And every player I've talked to, every former Marshall athlete I've talked to has those, like, yeah, I know who you're talking about. So
Yeah,
who's that guy? Who are those guys? Maybe a couple guys for you that did every damn thing the right way, but will never, never be fully recognized for what they meant to your teams.
well, when you say it like that, to me, that's everybody that's not in the Hall of Fame, right?
Okay.
Because those people who get into the Marshall Hall of Fame, or other Hall of Fames or whatever, those are the people who had great careers. That's who the fans tend to remember the most.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, we all have those teammates who pushed us to work hard every day in practice, whether they were guarding us, whether they were on the other team in scrimmages, maybe not even guarding us, but still making us work hard. Or those were the guys who maybe showed up a little bit earlier than you did. And you were like, well, if this guy's showing up early like this, then I need to get my ass in gear and, get here early too.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy that stays late, in the weight room, getting in some extra reps or getting in some extra shots after practice, sometimes most of those guys will not get recognized. They will have good careers. They might not score 1,000 points or whatever, but the fans don't really understand those stories because they get to hear me talk about my career.
Mm-hmm.
And these guys were basically doing the same thing, probably sometimes working harder than I was. Just didn't have the opportunity to showcase that like I was able, fortunately, to do. And I mean, you know, that's why it that's why I enjoy basketball. It is a team game, right? I mean, not everybody's going to score every point, in the game, or get every rebound or get every steal. Everybody's going to contribute. And I feel like, and I'm doing a project now where Steve Cotton and I are really trying to be very accurate with Marshall basketball history. I can look through the media guide and recognize that some names of guys who played at Marshall are not in there, or maybe some records aren't in there. And so I've really taken it upon myself and because Huntington's just an hour away still, I go to the old library and go through microfilm and look for every game that's ever been played in Marshall history from the beginning. Look for box scores, who scored what, who, I'm going to copy down the box score, the newspaper article, because everybody, if you played in a game at Marshall, regardless of if you ever scored, you should still be recognized with your name in a program, or those people shouldn't be forgotten because they laid the groundwork for myself and Charlie Slack and Hal Greer, all these guys who have played at Marshall, even Andrew Taylor and Tavion Kinsey today, Micah and all those guys who are playing with Dan today. Those guys laid the groundwork, and those people should always be recognized because that's part of your history. That's part of what makes Marshall so great, and not just in basketball. I think it should be done in every sport, right? I don't think any of your athletes should be forgotten because it's because of them that we're still able to go and watch games today, and you got me on a little history rant there, I guess, but I mean,
No.
it's been it really has been fascinating because I thought as a historian that I knew so much about Marshall basketball. When I started this project a few months ago, like I thought I knew everything, right? Like, but it's been amazing to read these articles and learn about some of these players who I knew were in the Marshall Hall of Fame, but I didn't actually know about their career, right? And so it's just been unbelievable to read and learn more about Red Christ, who played in the 20s, and Walt Wallowak, and even Cam Henderson. Like, I mean, how great of a coach he was before he even got to Marshall, and all of these teams that Marshall's played over the years. I mean, who can imagine today, that we were playing against like Kentucky and Louisville and Cincinnati almost every year. I would love to see those teams on the schedule, even though, you would think, I don't know if you're going to win those games. But, I mean, Cincinnati, Louisville, Kentucky, Xavier. I mean, we even made trips when Cam Henderson first coached. We played CCNY, which is one of the great teams of the 40s and 50s. Long Island University, Claire B., who was from West Virginia. I mean, the basketball history that I've just learned going through that, it's been absolutely amazing. And I can't wait till this project's done so we can actually share it with everybody. And hopefully all Marshall fans will learn more about Marshall basketball history.
Well, I tell you what, it's interesting that you bring that up because we didn't talk about that at all leading into this. And I'm thrilled to know that that's happening because weekly we're looking for stats and looking into record books and things like, and it just doesn't exist.
And that's kind of how
there.
it got started. A couple years ago, I think Marshall played the University of Pikeville, which is down the road, in like an exhibition game. And I had talked to Steve Cotton. He was like, well, what can you tell me about UPike? And so I was telling him about some of the players that I knew that were there. And I was like, I wonder how many times we've played them. And so, I had to go to the old media guide and look through the schedules. And I was just like, there's got to be a better way to, to do this quickly. And so I just had it in my head. I was like, man, listen, if I can do something or make a website where like at the click of a button, you can pull up a school and the all-time record against Marshall and every box score from all those games and who scored what and how many rebounds a guy had against that team, however many. I was like, Steve, that would make your job a lot easier because you could talk about all these different things on the radio. And he was like, well, I've started doing some of the history stuff. I was like, let me help you. So
I'm in.
I was like, I just took it upon myself. I was like, I'm kind of interested to know this stuff too.
Yeah.
Like what's Cam Henderson's record against Eastern Kentucky or Western Kentucky, or, head-to-head matchups against certain coaches, or who's some of the famous players that Marshall basketball has had to face off against, in the history of the game. And, it's just, I've just made it up into the early 50s where I'm going to have to go back and fill in some spots. But man, I can't wait to get to where, Hal Greer and Charlie Slack, and I'm going to read a little bit more about these guys because, I got to meet those guys. they've since passed. But, you know, and I'm always kicking myself because I got to be great friends with Charlie Slack. And, you know, fortunately, I'm second in rebounding to him. Nobody will ever catch him in Marshall history. I mean, to get 1,900 and whatever
Good Lord.
rebounds in 4 years, crazy. But just to think of the stories that he would tell, and now as an older person, thinking of questions that I would have loved to have asked, you know, and once I get into some of his games, I'll have even more questions that I wish I could have asked him.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, I think that's all part of history, though. You want to learn, at least in my case, anyway. I wanted to learn the history of the guys that came before me. You know, what was Marshall basketball? What was it about? And so hopefully the guys that are playing now and the guys that'll play later, they'll want to know that stuff too. You know, who is this guy that's in our locker room? We see his name and a few accomplishments or what,
Mm-hmm.
but can anybody tell, you know, I mean, what's his story? What you know, what was the process? And that's kind of what drives me in this project. I want people to know about not just the people that are in the Hall of Fame, but the people who made this program great, the people
Mm-hmm.
who tend to not be talked about very much. And I mean, I learn so much every day just by doing a little bit of research, like, you know, finding players from Kentucky that I didn't even know played at Marshall. I've seen the name, but I didn't know they were from Kentucky. And so, you know, when you make those connections and things like that, it just drives me to want to know more. I
Yeah, you
just have
don't
this
want to quit, right? You
Yeah, I
just
just
keep
have this
digging,
quest.
keep digging.
It's like I have this quest of knowledge about Marshall basketball history all of a sudden, and so
Well,
it's been a great journey. I can't wait till it's finished, and you know,
man.
I think it'll open up a lot more conversations for people to have about other players that played at Marshall, and not just the Hal Greers and Charlie Slacks and Walt Wallowacks and Leo
Mm-hmm.
Birds and JR Vanhoose's, Tamar Slays. You know,
Right.
I think people will want to see and learn about some of these other players who their name may be in the record book, may not be, but you know, we'll see where it goes. We'll just
Let,
see
let
where.
me let me give you a great example about this for me, because it's way more than about those small number of guys who have a jersey hanging up in the Cam Henderson Center. It's far more than just that, right? Great players, not taking anything, obviously great players, but there are so many other great stories, great players that came through. And one player particular that sticks out to me, because I think I might have still been, I must have been a young alumni, a recent grad, because I remember we played WVU one year in Charleston, right? And I went to the game, and there was a guard, and you probably know him, Ronnie Don.
That's my guy, man.
Ronnie shot the freaking lights out in Charleston that night, and
I
I talk
love
about
Ronnie,
that.
man.
I talk about that forever, but I don't know anything about him. But I know, and I say it just like this: that's the night that Ronnie Don shot the lights out in Charleston. That's what I say when I talk about that.
Listen, man, Ronnie is a great guy. We actually played against each other in high school. I'm a few years older than him, but when he came on his visit to Marshall, I was his host.
Oh,
So I mean, the
I
guy
did
who
not know
doesn't
that.
listen, the guy who doesn't like to go out, right? Like it was
Oh
my
yeah,
job
yeah.
to take Ronnie out and show him a good time. I mean, I couldn't say, Ronnie, let's go to the library, let's go have some fun. You know,
let's go. Let's
we
go rip
actually
up
did.
some microfilm. This will be great.
Yeah, we actually did go out, and you know, of course we talked about playing against each other. His dad was a high school coach,
Mm-hmm.
and so you know we had that Kentucky high school basketball background, and so I was so glad when he decided to come. Uh, a lot of people probably don't know this, but Ronnie Don and Patrick Sparks, who later went to Western and played 2 years at Kentucky, they came on a visit together. We really wanted to get both of them, but we got Ronnie, and you know, I was so glad that you know he really had a good career at Marshall, and still a good friend.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're Facebook friends. We played in Northern Kentucky. The high school coach that, or the high school team that I helped coach for, we played in Northern Kentucky a couple years ago. Ronnie came over to the game, so I got seen for a little bit, and you know, we stay in touch. But yeah, man, I mean, it's like that. You know, people might remember one big game, one big moment that somebody had, but there's more than just that
But
one
that's a
game or that
story,
one moment
right?
to those person to
That's a
that person.
guy. That's a
Yeah,
guy that is stuck in my brain.
yeah,
And there's just nothing exists. That's what you're working on. Something will exist to where
yeah,
I can learn more, right?
yeah. I mean, and
That's
it's
so
all about,
great.
it's all about, as a teacher, it's all about learning that history, right? Learning the things that players before you had to go through, the things that they had to experience, the things that they did to keep this program going and getting it to where it is today. Uh, and I think that's, that was an important part for me why I came to Marshall. It was to help get the program to a certain point,
Mm-hmm.
and I think through this history you'll have a lot of those stories of guys that came for whatever reason to Marshall because they liked what they saw or they enjoyed who they played for, played with, and kind of how they moved the program along and kept it going, and it is where it is today because of those guys.
Yeah, I think that's a great project. I don't know how long it's going to take, but man, it's going to be really cool when it's done.
Well, it feels like it's going to take forever because I'll read an article and I'll learn something and I'm like, well, I got to find out more about this, and so I go down rabbit holes and I'm
That's-
just, what am I doing? Like I don't know what I'm doing.
yeah. Okay, you've been blessed to have probably a phenomenal amount of coaches at all levels, right? And coaches are, boy, they're an interesting breed. I mean, at least I was never a high producing athlete, right? My career ended in high school at a very meager level of achievement, but I still had some characters for coaches, right? And they all have this knack of sayings that they just say, and I call them isms, right? So coach isms. Do you find yourself using some of those coach isms that you
All the
had
time.
beat into your
All
head?
the time. Listen, you started. You didn't even have to ask the question. I've already got like in my head.
So what is it? What are they? Some of those
Well,
best ones.
Greg White is going to kill me. I know he's going to kill me. It's not even really an ism. We
Yeah.
just, oh my gosh, I'm going to tell it. I don't care. I know he loves me, so it'll be all right. So Greg White loved a dry erase board, man. He loved to write whatever you were going to do, write scouting report or whatever. So we're practicing in Gullickson Hall, and it's an early morning practice, like 6 in the morning or whatever. And we're done. And so for some reason, he liked to write like what we were going to do, like after practice. And so we were going to have milk, donuts, orange juice. They were going to have all that stuff in the locker room for us. And he was writing that on the board for some reason. And so he's writing it and talking about it. And I mean, he did it all the time. And Joe DeBurgess is behind me. And he starts laughing. And I'm like, bro, like, what are you laughing? Like, like, what are you laughing for? And he's like pointing at the board. And Coach White has spelled donuts, dog nuts, DOGNUTS, right? He's like, so we're going to have, he's like, we've got milk, we've got donuts. And Joda's like, Coach, don't you mean dog nuts? And when he said, like, everybody just starts laughing. So, and the reason I don't mind to tell that story about dog nuts, Tamara gets in the Hall of Fame a couple years ago, 2014. I'm there. Joda's there. Travis Young, Cornelius is there. Josh Perkey. Coach White's there. Well, we all, the players that played with Tamar we want a picture. We want a picture with him. And so Roger Adams, I don't know if you know Roger. Roger was our team preacher. He's there. And we got somebody taking the picture. And so they're like, all right, like 1, 2, 3, smile or whatever. And so they get to 3, and Coach White says dog nuts. And there is this fantastic picture because he knows we make fun of him about that. And I have the best picture because somebody snapped it when we're all starting to laugh, right? And so we're all in on the joke, and Coach knows he's the joke. And so, man, listen, just I mean, any of those guys that I played with during that time, you just say dog nuts, and they already know the story. They know that the guy can't, Coach White can't spell, right? So, I mean, that's not an ism, but that's just
But that's better than an ism.
that's
That's
just a great that's just a great story. And so listen, so and my wife knows the story, because I've
oh,
told it 1,000 times. She was at the Hall of Fame thing. So when we go get donuts, she'll be like, or we pass a place, she'll be like, "You want some dog nuts?" And I mean, it's just in the vocabulary
it's a
for us.
running life joke
Yeah,
forever.
it's just a life joke, man. It is.
That's so great. Did not see that one coming. That is way better than a
Oh yeah,
coachism.
I mean that. Well, you-
Oh my
that's just one
gosh.
of many. That's just
I'm
one.
sure. That one's PG though. Let's put it that way. That one's made for all audiences. That's
I'm
great
telling you.
comedy. Oh my
Yeah.
God, that is great comedy. Look, I've got to ask you a semi-serious question because this is one that I want to be a staple for all of these episodes because there's always going to be people or kids every year that are entering this phase, right? So knowing what you know now, and we're all wiser than we were coming out of high school, freshman in college. So during that 2-year stint to where you're really going through the recruiting process, it may or may not be overwhelming to you. It might be getting tiresome to you, whatever. You make the decision and you finally show up at your decision school. And now you have to adjust to life like we talked about earlier. Thinking back now, what advice would you give to your freshman self or your senior high school self that would have been helpful to you?
Oh my goodness, that's a good question. Just there's going to be good times. There's going to be bad times. You just have to make sure that you're mentally tough enough to understand that it's not all going to be bad, right? I
Mhm.
mean, especially when you're an athlete, when you get there, yeah, everybody's going to be bigger, stronger, faster than you are. But after a few weeks, a few months, you're just as fast, as strong as, and as quick as they are, so don't give up when things feel like they're not going your way, because they will. I mean, it's just that part of growing up. I think that, adversity can create good good people or bad people. Some people just can't handle adversity, and I think if you can handle it and push your way through it, I think you will be successful no matter what you do. I mean, it's you have to just be understanding that you're not going to get everything right away.
Mhm.
Right? You're going to make mistakes. You're going to not know how to do things, and that's fine. Ask questions. Ask for help. That's not a sign of weakness. That's how you get through things. And I would just say, just keep pushing through it. I mean, I felt like it was easy for me on the court stuff because I could take care of that. It was yeah, I have to adjust to a new place. Get out, talk to people, make yourself comfortable. That's how you get through those things.
Yeah. I would take that even a step further and just say, you are strong enough to get through it.
Yeah. I mean,
You are.
because something goes bad, that doesn't mean like it's your fault or that you're a failure. It didn't work out. Right?
Yeah. I mean, two kids being two, well, we're calling us kids, two former kids that grew up in coal country. This is a perfect analogy of that. When things get hard and things get tough, coal turns into diamonds through pressure and heat. It's not from an easy lifestyle, right?
Yeah.
So you're made through the fire and the pressure. You want that to a certain extent because it will show you what you're made of. And by golly,
Yeah.
you're
Yeah. I
tough
mean, listen, people surprise themselves every day, right?
every day.
I mean, so you have it can't be roses and lavender and great smells all the time, right?
That's right.
Sometimes you're gonna have to get down in the mud and figure out how to get yourself out of there, and that's kind of what makes it special.
Yeah.
When you look back and be like, hey, God, that sucked, but I got through it.
Yeah.
That was at least I know how to deal with it the next time.
That's how you build character and confidence, man.
Exactly
The
right.
only way
Right.
you
Yeah.
go through some stuff. So this current 2023 basketball team, right? They're pretty exciting. Big turnaround from a year ago, and well, looking to make some waves. Still late in this season, still very much alive. And Very exciting to watch. What about this 2023 team, particularly, really, really excites you when you watch them?
Well, I mean, listen, anytime you get to watch Tavion play, I mean, it's always a treat,
Yeah.
but the supporting cast and the other guys that he has out there, Andy Taylor, another Kentucky kid from Corbin, has done a great job, uh, you know, taking care of the ball, scoring the basketball, playing defense. I mean, Micah Hangloten, I mean, they, uh, impact freshman of the year in the Sun Belt Conference. I mean, you can't say enough good things about him. Great rebounder. Doesn't even really, to me, he doesn't even really look to care if he scores points. It's all about rebounding and blocking shots and helping the team win. You know, Kerfman can shoot the ball from anywhere. I like to see Cam play, and I mean, it's just exciting to watch, man. I mean, they play great defense. The offense is high powered. I tell Coach D'Antoni all the time when I go up there, I was like, Coach, there's no way I could play for you. And he was like, what are you talking about? I was like, first of all, I didn't shoot that many threes
Yeah.
in college. And I don't really know if you use post up players anymore. So I would have to have at least learned how to shoot threes at some point. And he'll just laugh and carry on. But no, I mean, man, they're exciting to watch. I was so hoping that they would win, the regular season title. They just came up a game short.
Yeah.
But hopefully this week in the conference tournament, they get that championship and can make some noise in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, that would be really, really cool. I didn't know this, and I said this on the Thundercast when we were talking about it, that the Sun Belt regular season champion gets an auto NIT bid. I had no
Yeah,
clue about that.
and I think that would have I think that would have maybe relieved some pressure so that they would have been really loose coming into this conference tournament. Nothing to lose.
Hmm.
If we have to fall back on it, we're going to go to the NIT. But I think maybe with that loss, maybe they do now feel like they got to prove something.
Hmm.
They're going to have their minds right and they'll be ready to play. I think is it Texas State
Hmm.
is who they're playing this evening, and so yeah, I mean, I hope things work out for them. I'm always going to pull for the herd,
Of course.
regardless of win loss record or whatever. But yeah, man, this year is exciting. I hope it can be as exciting as the year John Elmore and those guys beat Wichita State and made it into the second round against West Virginia. I'm always pulling for the herd to get into the tournament, man. There's nothing like it. I never got to experience that, but and that's an accomplishment. I mean,
Sure is.
when you get Marshall into the NCAA tournament, because let's face it, being in the Mid American Conference, the Sun Belt, you're not going to get an automatic bid very often. You have to be very good. You have to be very good throughout the course of the season, especially at the end of the season. And so, hopefully the guys can keep it together, keep playing like they had been for the last couple of weeks, and bring home another championship.
Yeah, it looks like this move to the Sun Belt has been really, really good. I mean, the Conference USA was really kind of top heavy, and it's kind of wild that the best teams basketball wise sort of went with us to the Sun Belt.
Well, you listen. I'm excited about the Sun Belt. I was never enthusiastic about Conference USA just because I am not going to watch the herd in Texas.
Who
Right,
is?
like I will not. I'm not going to travel to UTEP. I don't think there's any
Mm-mm.
Marshall grads in Southern Texas. Right, so being able to be in a conference where fans can drive to James Madison or App State or even Old Dominion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have some pretty good natural rivalries, I think, already.
Yes, sir.
In just the locations of where some of these schools are. So, when you got a fan base that's willing to travel, and you're now in a conference where the fans can travel and go support your guys. In football too. I mean, I think it's a good conference for football. I think it's a great conference for the baseball and softball teams. I mean, I don't see how moving to the Sun Belt is in any way considered to be a bad move because
No way.
the only thing I wish we could have brought maybe Western Kentucky in with us. I mean, because having that rivalry out of Conference USA with Western would have been great. But listen, man, I'm excited about the Sun Belt just because if I'm somewhere, maybe I'm out of town in Virginia or I'm down in North Carolina or something. If the herd's playing, man, I can stop in and go. I'm never going to be in El Paso, Texas.
Ever.
You know,
Yeah.
so just go ahead and rule that out. But
Yeah. I
I
think that,
mean, as far as travel and competition, I think we're in a great spot. I really do.
yeah, this is a super great spot. And we talked about this once before on another episode of the podcast. It's like Marshall has this um this history of being a really well traveling fan base. And it was hard to maintain that in the Conference USA because
Yeah,
you're not gonna go to Miami. You're not.
right. Yeah, yeah. I mean, nobody's going to Florida Atlantic. Nobody's going to like I said, El Paso.
You go to Western because
Yeah.
you can drive
Well,
there.
there's a lot of Marshall grads in Lexington, Kentucky, which is not that far from Bowling Green.
Right.
So there. I mean, that's that's why I say I wish Western could have came into the Sun Belt with us. But even in the Mid American Conference, man, I mean, you had Ohio, you had Miami of Ohio, you had Akron, you had Kent. I mean, all those, and we always had fans on the road with us.
Mm-hmm.
Now they weren't going to Buffalo or Northern Illinois, which I mean, I wouldn't see why you go to those two places either. But as far as like you said, we have great fans and they travel.
And now they
So
can
being in
again.
the Sun Belt is definitely a no-brainer to me
Yep.
because, I mean, you can travel to most of these games, and really, when you have teams that are playing well, like our football and basketball teams have so far, I mean, you're going to get fans to go on the road with you, no
Sure
doubt,
will.
no doubt
Yep.
about it.
So let's just say that conference realignment is seemingly never done. So you can't close the door that Western Kentucky might make their way back to the Sun Belt once again. That would be really awesome. I think the Sun Belt has positioned itself to be one of those premier, if not the premier, East Coast G5 conference above the American, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, it's an attractive conference because it is located in what you would consider warmer states
Yeah.
for basketball season, right? I mean, you don't really have to worry a lot about snow. The teams seem to have a lot of very good sports athletic programs,
Yep.
not just basketball, football, but like I said, baseball, softball, all of these different sports. And I think you can attract schools to come into this conference and actually build it up to where it could be something really good.
Yeah.
Really, really good.
I mean, it's really good now. It could be better, but it's
Yeah,
really good. I'm thrilled to be here. Let's say that.
oh yeah,
I'm
I mean,
thrilled to be here.
listen, I am too. I mean, like I said, Conference USA, it was hard to. I don't want to say it was hard to support Marshall because that's never hard, but it was hard to kind of get into. Do you really want to watch UTEP play in Huntington? I don't really know anybody that plays at UTEP. Don't know a
Yeah.
lot about the program. I mean, I know a little bit about its history, but App State, Old Dominion, they're I see them on Twitter. They're always talking trash with Marshall fans. So yeah, let's go and let's heckle these players a little bit. You know what I'm saying?
I like that.
Let's build up a good home court advantage. When these schools come in.
Yeah,
And
JR's still able to throw an elbow down low every now and then, guys.
well, listen. When we played it, I guess it was App State before we were in the Sun Belt. And they were heckling our football fans. I guess the year before last, I was like, oh, I can't. I'm so glad we're in this conference now because that's like that's a rivalry that is going to be pretty good. I think
That one's one that's renewed because that predates you and I. That's a Southern Conference old school rivalry.
Oh yeah,
Them
old school
and
Southern
Georgia
Conference,
Southern.
man.
That
Yeah, I mean,
those Southern Conference fans can tell you some stories about
oh
that.
yeah. Yes, I know. I've heard a lot of stories already.
So they are even thrilled. We've captured so
Yeah.
many eras of fan by making this move and reuniting with some of these schools. It's just been great all the way around.
Well, and like you said, those old era fans who remember those Southern Conference games with App State, they may now travel again to those road games, which I think that's something great. You always want to have fans on the road. You do.
Yeah, it certainly does absolutely help. Look, I have kept you far longer than I promised I would. I'm really sorry about that.
Bro, listen, tomorrow's Saturday. It's not like I got to get up for work. So,
Well, okay, speaking of work, we can't get out of here without talking about this, because I mentioned earlier that you were honored with quite the achievement. And yeah, we've talked a lot about basketball. And I mentioned in the intro to this episode that you were an academic All-American. We've talked a lot about history and your love for history during our conversation. And you were recognized in a completely different capacity other than basketball, which you told me, before we hit record, was just like really rewarding, really nice to have that part of you be recognized. You were named American History Teacher of the Year in the state of Kentucky, right?
yeah, that's I'd gotten it's through the Sons of the American Revolution, the state organization, and I was notified that somebody had nominated me, so that I needed to go online and go through the application process, and of course, when you get nominated for Teacher of the Year, you think, man, how many teachers are there in the state of Kentucky?
Sure, yeah.
And should I even fill out this application? Right. But I did. I think it was a good opportunity to be able to showcase, kind of like what I do in the classroom as far as American history, and, why it's important to teach it. And, you have to write it. They wanted me to write an essay about how I teach and why it's important, and, get all these recommendation letters and all this stuff. And I had no idea that I would win, much less even be maybe a finalist for it. And so when they notified me that I had won, I mean, it was, like I told you earlier, I mean, probably one of the top awards I've ever gotten, including all the basketball awards and Hall of Fames I've been inducted into, because, basketball is a game, and I felt that it came quite easy to me once I kind of figured it out. Teaching's a whole different, teaching high school is a whole different animal, because, I've been doing this 20 years, and sometimes I feel that I still haven't figured it out yet. And, but to be recognized for that, a profession that you've been doing for a long time, it like I said earlier, it's very rewarding. It's definitely one of the coolest awards I've ever got, Teacher of the Year, because, like I told you earlier, again, I haven't said that a lot of people just remember me as a basketball player. And so being able to, have that award is, hey, listen, you're a pretty good teacher as well. And so,
pretty good, putting it lightly, I think.
it just, it makes you feel good, because like any kind of basketball award, you want to be rewarded for your hard work. And so the kids, we talked about the fans getting to see you perform on the court. Your students, the kids, they get to see you in the 45, 50 minutes that they have you in class. They don't see really all the preparation behind the scenes that goes into making a lesson, teaching a lesson, trying to figure out if you're teaching it the right way for them to understand it, and doing all these things. And so, I would have to say, as far as career wise, man, teaching's pretty tough. It's a little bit tougher than basketball. Basketball, I had to worry about me putting the ball in the basket, stopping the other person from doing it. Teaching a room full of kids, you have to make sure that everybody's understanding what you're trying to get them to understand, concepts that you're trying to teach. And so it's a very delicate balancing act that it's pretty tough to do. And so, to be recognized for that, I go to Lexington this weekend for the award ceremony this next coming weekend. So it's, it'll definitely be a special moment.
Yeah, I would say so. Man, that's so super cool. I mean, it is. When I saw that fly across the timeline, there was maybe a week ago, 2 weeks ago, even if it was that long, I was like, wow, that is so cool, because I knew that you were a teacher, just through social media. And you're right. This is very much like what we were talking about earlier, with all the work that nobody sees in the locker room and in the weight room and all that kind of stuff. It's just the same thing all over again. It's all the preparation. It's all the execution that nobody sees.
Right. Well, listen, I'm not going to lie either. athletes, they tend to get a bad rap because, people think that we get our grades handed to us in
Sure.
school, and we might not be very smart. And I'm not going to lie, social studies teachers tend to get a bad rap too, especially when you coach, because as a coach, people ask you, well, what do you teach? And when you say social studies, they're like, yeah, that figures. About
That
every
figures.
coach I know
I
teaches
knew
social
you were going to
studies.
say that.
Right? So you're like, no, you don't understand. Like I enjoy, I don't know why you have this misconception about social studies teachers, but we actually like to do our job. We like to talk
Yeah.
about history. So yeah, it's pretty good to get to put those misconceptions to rest, that you know all coaches are social studies teachers because that's the only thing that they can do, or maybe they don't even teach that, or basketball players or football players aren't very smart. They get their grades handed to them because they're good athletes. So yeah, to be recognized, like that, it helps put a lot of that to sleep.
Yeah, and you've done a phenomenal job of that. I mean, teacher of the year is I don't think I'll ever be recognized in my particular field as a something of the year because that's just rarefied air. I love using that term because that's what it is. It's not they don't hand these
Well,
out like
it,
candy.
it is very special. It is very special, and not only teacher of the year, but American history teacher of the year.
Hmm.
I like the sound of that because I and just talking with you, you can already tell I love history. I enjoy being a part of Marshall basketball history and Kentucky high school basketball history, and you know I love the research. I love the work. I just love talking about history, and so to be recognized, for that love, and that you do a pretty good job in your profession doing that, getting that to students. Hopefully, the students I've had, maybe they've come into my class not being a big fan of history, and maybe I've told a story or taught a lesson that's kind of sparked an interest that maybe they enjoy it a little bit better. And so, that's what you hope for any teacher to do,
Hmm.
impact a student somehow. And for whoever nominated me, listen, I appreciate that. And I can't thank you enough. I'm sure I'll never find out who nominated me and who started that process, but I definitely appreciate that.
Yeah. I just keep saying so cool. It just is because I don't know any better way to put it because I can't imagine that won't happen to me. So it's just so cool. Look, I'm going to get you out of here on this. I'm going to give you an open forum here. I'm going to give you the opportunity to just kind of close out with anything that you would like to say to whoever might be watching, and then we'll get the heck out of here because this was a hell of a lot of fun, and I want you to kind of have the last word as we leave.
Oh my goodness. See, now you're putting me on the spot. Not
Not
even
at
a
all.
question. It's like an
No.
open-ended
Yeah.
oh my goodness.
No,
Well,
freedom, man. The open forum to speak to herd fans or whoever might click the link.
well, I tell I probably don't say it a lot, but I definitely not only enjoyed, but I loved my time at Marshall University. And I do tell people this, some of the best friends that I have in my life now are people that I met at Marshall in Huntington. Um, I've told you stories about seeing my former teammates, and it's always a hug. It's
Hmm.
always this, and being able to be part of that community, and now live in my old hometown and still be able to go back to that community, and people will recognize you or talk to you. That's always a great feeling. That's always a great feeling. And so, you asked that question earlier, and I told you, kind of that I know I made the right choice in early in my life when, at that time. And, when you're 17, 18 years old, there's a very good chance you're going to make a bad decision at that point. But man, I was so fortunate to be able to make the right one in this case, and go to a community where I've always felt welcomed. Um, I still feel welcomed when I go back. I enjoy going back to Huntington. I enjoy going back to a football game, a basketball game, any really kind of event at Marshall University. And that the new athletic director, Christian Spears, he called me a couple of weeks ago and told me that they were going to expand the Hall of Fame committee at Marshall, and asked me to be a part of that because he knew my love for history and how I felt about Marshall University. And I mean, man, I definitely jumped at the chance. So, I'm starting to feel like I'm able to give back to the university in some way by working, with the Hall of Fame committee, and being able to recognize other athletes that were part of Marshall University. So, yeah, I mean, I appreciate everybody's support over the years, and continued support every time I see them. And listen, I love when people come up and, like you said, they usually remember the games. And so usually conversations are like, "Hey, I remember you in this game," and I enjoy that. I do enjoy that. But I'll never forget, a couple years ago, I was on the tickets for a Marshall basketball game, and I just so happened to be at that game. Some kid came up to me to ask for my autograph and asked me if I used to be JR Vanhoose. So I won't forget that. But I
Holy
can laugh
moly.
at that like I can laugh about the dog nut story too. Yes, I told the kid I did used to be JR Vanhoose. So
Luckily, I still am.
yeah, fortunately I still am. But no, I mean, I have absolutely nothing but good thoughts and great feelings about Huntington and Marshall, and it'll always hold a special place in my heart, just because of everything I got to experience there.
Well, I think I speak for all of the Herd fan base when they say when I say we certainly appreciate you, not just JR Vanhoose, the basketball player. Okay, let me put that out there, because you've proven that our athletes, you're just one of many that have gone on and achieved at a high level in life. So we appreciate, of course, all the hard work on the court, all the positivity that you bring off the court in adult life and post undergraduate years, because that lasts so much longer than the undergraduate career, you know?
Right? Yeah, and I think people forget that. They see athletes for a very short period of time,
Mm-hmm.
and those people are going to be the ones that are going to be involved in the community long after their playing career is over. And we all, and I hate to speak for everybody, but I feel like when I see former athletes and teammates, we all want to continue to help giving back to the school that was so special to us. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
listen, I basically got a free education because of certain skills that I had on a basketball court, right? And I know that's like a monetary value, but how do you repay? How do you repay that? You always want to be a part of the university, and you're just so thankful that you were given that opportunity, because like we've talked for the last couple hours, small town West Virginia, small town Eastern Kentucky, you know, without those opportunities, some of us may never have been able to get a degree, and
Mm-hmm.
both of my parents worked, but I don't know if they could afford, firstborn kid, to pay for a college education like that. And so, you're always thankful because of the opportunity that the school gave you. And so, I'm always thankful for that. And I hope the university and the people that are associated recognize that, we're thankful for what you gave us.
Mm-hmm.
And we hope that through our play and through our performance that, we repaid you a little bit for that trust and helping us get an education.
I think that's well said. Um, I think you've repaid that investment many times over because of the personality you have, the interactions you have with folks, the sense, just the overall level of you show you're grateful. That goes a long way. It
Yeah,
goes
yeah,
a long
it
way.
does. I mean, I can't not be grateful.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I have great friends that I met in my time there, and I was able to graduate with a degree that put me into a profession where now, I'm being recognized for my good work in that profession. And so, I mean, I owe a lot to Marshall. But there's some mornings I wake up and I feel it too. Those knees and hips and
Yeah.
ankles, they don't feel so good. So it was a lot of hard work and dedication, but
Yeah.
And anytime, especially high school kids at the school I teach, anytime they have questions about Marshall University, I'm more than happy to answer it and encourage kids to just go visit and see all the great opportunities that they offer. Because I mean, there's definitely no place like it, especially this close to home.
Well said, brother. I am Katie Hudnall. That is JR Vanhoose, and this has been Inside the Thunder.